want to say thank you to Dick Reminger for the use of this building. Dick, thank you very much. We appreciate it. This evening's presentation, Northern St. Genevieve County, is being sponsored by the Beacon Restaurant. And I think they fit in very well with the history of this. So we appreciate that. We would like to tell you that if you have an item you would like to hear us make a speaker series on, please bring it to our attention. We're glad to research it and make a presentation on it. We just need suggestions from people, and most of these have all been suggestions from somebody who has attended a previous speaker series and said, we'd like to hear you talk about this or that. So please don't be bashful. This evening, Northern St. Genevieve County is being presented to you by Juanita Holst, kept in memory of Juanita Holst. Juanita preserved all these memories for us. Juanita kept all the stories safe for us. And she also brought us a son, Bill Holst, who's going to make the presentation for us. Bill Holst is the third of 4 of her children. Bill has lived his entire life in Northern St. Genevieve County, off of Holst Road, at Current. He worked at PBG for 30 years, where he retired from PBG, and then went to Equipment Pro for 10 years, and now he's a presenter for Could we have a hand for Bill Holst?
Well, I'd like to thank a few people. Dwayne Holst, a lot of pictures. The museum staff with a lot of help. The Beacon for sponsoring. Bill Holst, my son's working the pictures. And the rest of it, I'd like to thank whoever helped Mom and Patsy make this book. We're going to get started. The picture on the screen is up at Danby, Missouri. That's about 2 miles north of the county line. And the only significance is the post office was in that store building. And all the north end of the county, all their mail came through Danby. There's a little bit more about it later, but I'll get to that. Then the next place headed south is the Brooks place. That's one of the buildings that's still standing there. Okay, that barn is still standing there. The Nosh family owns that property now, and as you can see, the barn is needing a little help standing there. All right, the Brooks, they came here in 1837, and he was a steamboat pilot, and he was friends with people up at Rush Tower, and he come to visit, and they rode around, and he decided that's where he wanted a house. So I don't know how many hundreds of acres he got, but he had a bunch of them. Okay, what you see in there in the middle of the picture is Kings Highway. There was a steel bridge eventually put up, and I couldn't go on the other side to get a better picture because it's private property, but this was taken from across the creek, and those bridge piers are still standing there from the late 1800s, and there was a steel bridge across there. And that was on the Kings Highway. There's the steel bridge, and there's a group of people standing there watching somebody getting baptized down in the creek. And they were from the Lebanon Church. God was on.
By the way, as Bill's presenting this is a crowd participation. If you see anything on there that you know something or would want to add a story about it, please speak up. We'd love to hear it.
Now, the original owners were the Brooks. Whenever they built this house, okay, this is a spring house. And it had steps going down, but you can see there's a building on top. And they had slaves, and the oldest woman slave, that was her house up on top. And her job every morning was to get up and roast coffee. I don't know where they got it. And the lady of the house drank 6 cups of coffee a day, so she had to get up every morning and roast coffee beans. Whenever they got tired of this place, they sold it to a man by R.E. Byrd in Virginia Byrd. That's why that long stretch of highway on the Jefferson County side is called Byrd Stretch. And the Nose family bought it from Byrd's in it was either late 50s or very early 60s. The Brooks was married in 1836. Came to the White House from Rush Tower, and he had a friend in Virginia, and the friend came here to Jefferson County, and he fell in love with Captain White's daughter. And that's who he ended up marrying. And his Dr. Kennett built Kennett's Castle. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Kennett's Castle, but it is a castle. And it sits in Jefferson County up where 61 goes under 55. You could hang a right up by River Cement. They looked for a site and decided that right there on the county line creek, 2 miles from the river. And it seemed like that was going to be a safe place for them until 1841, where John Brooks drove one of his steamboats up and tied it to a sycamore tree in the yard. So that didn't work out too good for him. They had their slaves, and household slaves were Pone, Dib, Mary, Susan, and George. And his name was actually George Washington. And this George, later on, one of the daughters got married, and George was given to Luella Brooks. And she was named for one of the steamboats. And she married in Aubuchon, and they went to French Village. And within that yard, they must have found, or in the woods, found hundreds and hundreds of maple trees. And it says that they had their own sugar house, furnace, boiling kitty, kettles. They had trenches for the slop to run out. And they said they had a big party making the maple syrup. The Danby was named for Dan Kaufman. He was a nephew of the Brooks, and he came to the Brooks place to help run the plantation, as they call it. And he wanted a post office, so they give him ground up and what is Danby, and that's why it's called Danby, because his first name was Dan. And then one of the little boys, nobody paid much attention to him. So they once sent him on an errand, and he had to go to French Village. And he come back in the dark and the moon, and he had $1,000 in gold in his boots. Nobody paid any attention to him. And another time, he was coming from French Village, and he had a wagon load of apples. But they had a whole bunch of money stashed under them apples, and some raiders came along and He said, just help yourself, they ain't mine. And so they helped themselves, but they never did know that all the money that he was transporting was underneath the apples. And he was 85 years old whenever he died. He was cared for. He was cared for by a daughter of that Luella. Miss Brooks, she was out in the garden with her kids, and turned it what said blood curdling yell, and it was Indian and full war bonnet, tomahawk, and she said once she got herself together, she just went over and it's described as she remonstrated him. I'm supposing he got a good tongue lashing. So he lowered his hatchet and started laughing and said he was just making fun of him. And she asked what he wanted. He said that was the hunting grounds of his ancestors, and he was coming home to die, and wanted to know if he could stay in the barn. Sure, stay in the barn. He lived in the barn for 6 years. Sometimes in the cold weather, when it was time for people to be baptized, they just broke the ice and you had to wade out in there until it was at least waist deep. So I imagine that was probably a fun day in that ice water. You know, there was a place on the farm after the Birds owned it called Birds Grove, and it was right along the Kings Highway. Well, they was building on this Highway 25 at the time, not 61, the old 25, and they would hit a piece of this old Kings Highway and come to Birds Grove, and they drove from St. Louis down to Birds Grove for their weekend parties. It's a long way to go to party, but the Bird had so many people, he built a bathhouse, and then spring house, they had plenty of water. Now they had festive occasion there. It was an Aubuchon and a Brooks wedding in 1860. The cooking preparations went on for 3 weeks. It said feasting and dancing lasted 3 days. And it describes what Luella was dressed in, and it's too lengthy to describe all of this. And then one of the slaves, Pone, his name was Pone, they had him dressed up fancy, and he had to serve tables, and in their big old house there, they ate upstairs. So everything had to be carried upstairs. They had, they called it an ox, which was a steer. That was all cooked. They had a roasted pig with a red apple in its mouth, 2-gallon decanters, and they constantly had to be filled. And 300 people were invited. That was a pretty big wedding. Now we got the Lebanon Church, Bill. There it is, and the building with the steeple on it is what's used every day, and the smaller building was torn down, and they built a new one, and there's just a walkway from the inside to the inside of the other building. They started out in a hand-hewed log church, probably get 30 people in it. next one, Bill. There it is. That's a new picture. That was a style, and it's still there. And it's been there since very early times. I think that's it. All right, now we go to the Lee place. I gotta get my page. Now this Lee family, their property adjoined the Brooks family. Now the Lee house, it's still there, and it's in St. Genevieve County. And they came there. Oh, the John Lee that had this, that's what it looked like at one time. He finally died in 1873, but they were there for a long time. And he's buried at Lebanon Church. And the John Lee, that's the way it looks today. And it's right off of Highway 61 at the north end of Holst Road. And John Lee had property in both Jefferson and St. John County, and he had more than 1,500 acres, so he had a pretty good place. And he gave the original land to build the Lebanon Church. And he came down the Ohio River on a flatboat to Cairo, and he crossed the Mississippi, came to St. Genevieve, and there he settled, found ground up at the north end of the county, and that's why he settled there. His first house was just a log house, and then they proceeded to build the house that's on the screen, and somewhere along the line somebody had to get underneath there in later years, and they put some steel beams underneath the floor to make sure everything stayed level, and it's well taken care of now. And this John Lee, he was pretty much an educated man, and most of the neighbors weren't, and he had some slaves too, so he made them all go to school. And the interesting thing is, they had to pay to go to school. Some kids had, or some families had maybe 2 kids, and it says here, some had 2.5 kids. And that was hard to figure out, but it goes on to say that some of them left at noon to go work on the farm. And most of the tuition was paid in Corkwood. Then he built a schoolhouse, and they had wanted the slaves in the wintertime drag a log up the path with a mule or an ox to get the snow out of the way, but the kids, they like walking out in the snow better than in the path. And he was, since there was no courts, he's the one that settled up disputes between neighbors, and the only thing was that they had to agree on his decision. So it states that the slaves built the first log church. That would have been in Lebanon, was just down the road just a little bit, or up the road. And this Lebanon church had the smaller building was the last after the log building. And we had the big church, and then the little building was the church. And it had 2 wood burning stoves in it. And about the time church was done with, it was warm enough. Then when they opened the doors for everybody to leave, could have just about been outside and been as warm. And those 2 stoves that was in there, Somehow my grandmother got one of them, and she used it in the Bruder house, and it's still out in the shed down at my grandma and grandpa's farm. So they still have that old stove. She used it in the Bruder house. That house has basically downstairs in the front has 2 rooms. Between those 2 rooms, there was a hallway and a staircase to the dining room, which was upstairs. And they had a big board hanging above the table, and there was a rope that went through the wall over into the kitchen, and they had one of them black slaves waving his fan around to keep them cool. I guess it was better than nothing. And they had a spring house was down the hill, right in back of the house, you see. And it said they had some Indians around there, and one of them Indian women was trying to get in the spring house through the little hole. Why she didn't go around the other side and just open the door. And she got stuck in there and drowned. It says another time, an Indian was trying to come through the window, and she shot it. And the lady that gives us this information here, she's the one that wrote this, and she says she still has this pearl handle Smith & Wesson, 32 caliber. Says that she's saying her grandpa had slaves, and one family had 2 kids, and he taught them all to read and write, which I had mentioned, and one of them ran off, one of the kids, and sometime later he got a letter from up in Canada thanking him for his freedom. Says that this lady that wrote this said her grandpa sold the farm and moved to St. Louis. And this Captain John Lee then had steamboats on the Mississippi, and one of them burned, and the captain in charge of the other one took off with it and went downriver, and he never saw it again. Then he ended up owning a hotel in St. Louis on Chambers Street. I don't know where that is. All right, Bill, we're gonna get to. Yeah. This is the house of Mr. Harmon. Never did Ernest Harmon, and it's on the Beacon Hill. And during the Depression, he ran a sawmill. He built the house, did everything. And while he was running the sawmill during the Depression, he told me that he wanted to at least make enough money so the people that worked for him at the sawmill could buy enough to survive on. So he was a pretty good old fella, and he was one instrumental when they built the Kinsey Fire Department. Man, now this is the beacon. That was the old beacon. That was the original building. And that was built by Charlie Grunmeyer. And he had lumber when he tore down the old grist mill in Kinsey, and that's what he built for a tavern. But Charlie didn't stay with anything very long. And the beacon, that light that you see up over the gable, it used to be way bigger. It was a light off a riverboat, and my Grandma and Grandpa lived almost a half a mile away, and it would light up their yard. It was hence the beacon. Then after that, it was added on to, you know, several owners. Cooksy's ran it, Wayne DeCluver ran it, Jesse Ferguson. Then Jim and M bought it. That's the Gibson in 1953. And the first thing they did was add to the right side of that building. They added on to it, and you went down the steps to what would be the basement, and there's where they had bathrooms, walk-in coolers, storage areas, and then later on they built onto the left side of it, and they put a dance floor. Now it's part of a home. And on Saturday nights, they did square dance in there. They had piano in there with Earl Thomas, and sometimes Buzz Madison was there. But as things progressed on Mondays they were closed, so Jim Gibson had that old station wagon, and he'd have it full of stuff, and he went around to different taverns up in the Lemay area, and he knew everybody, and I don't care if it was cigarette lighters, cigarette flints, handkerchiefs. He sold all of that stuff, but one day I was very old, and I went over there. Cars were there, so it was open. So I went in, and they was closing the place up. And apparently, there was some federal people who found out Jim Gibson was going around, and he was buying whiskey from somebody, and he was selling it to the taverns up in South St. Louis. Sounded like a good deal to me. And they closed the whole thing. I mean, instantly closed. Took his liquor license. Well, he didn't like that too well. So for 3 days, he didn't have a liquor license. So there was a Primo lived out of Double O, Double D, way out there, and there was a friend of his. So he rented the new restaurant next door to the Primo, and Primo got the beer license, and in that 3 days, they moved the back bar, the bar, and everything over into the restaurant. So for 3 days, he didn't have any beer, and that's a long stretch for him. And the Beacon right now is run by Jim Gibson's granddaughter and Mike. Mike was here a while ago. And that's a Brock that has the place up the street here. That's Jim Gibson's great-grandson. So it stayed in the Gibson's hands, but it changed a little bit. Now we're going to go to Now we're going to go to the Brands farm. And that house is still standing. And my grandparents bought that here on the courthouse steps in 1916. And they got 365 acres with it, and they paid $3,800 for it. And there was a big barn, which is gone, and other buildings, some of them still there. And the Brands had a son that went to St. John County schools, and he ended up going to a school to become a doctor. And he practiced for a while, and then he came back, and upstairs in that building he had his doctor's office. And then he was born there in 1856, and then he ended up dying as a young man of about 56 years old. And my grandparents lived in it for the rest of their days. And then in the late 40s, my grandmother's sister and husband moved in the house with them. And that was Uncle Frank and Levena Erb. They lived in the front, and my grandparents lived in the back. You can't see the rest of the house. Where is it?
Yeah.
If you go down Holst Road, you go about from the Beacon, you go about, I don't know if it's a quarter of a mile, and you'll hang a right on Marson Hollow Lane, and you just go down the hill, and right there it is, and it looks just like that. Except on the windows out. And if you kept going, Ray Meyer owned the next farm down that road, and the Colburns that are right over here, that's where they was raised down on that farm. And that farm was also owned at one time by somebody with the last name of Herman. And to get to his house, you went up to Bricky Road and you cut down a trail through the woods, and that's where the mail route was to his house. And it was always called the Lee Herman Road down through our woods. And all there's left of that place is two great big chimneys standing up.
I have a updated picture of it if you want to see it. Of the farm. I'll go too far now.
That's a rocket joke.
Thank you. All right. Hi, bud.
Now we got Chisholm Store, the Fairview. That little girl that's standing on the front porch with the accordion, that was Wilma. That's the Chisholm daughter. And she went to school at St. Agnes in Bloomsdale, and one of the nuns taught her how to play the accordion. So they figured that she was gonna grow up somewhere along the line. So they didn't get her a little one, they got her a big one. So she looked pretty full. And that store there was more than just a store. It was, there's everything he had there. Greenery, ice house, the store building, and his little motel. And that store was added on to 4 times. It used to be just the part with the gable in the front, and there was the store part, and 2 rooms. And that's where they started. That was in 1940. And they were building Highway 61 at the time. So they built the store before the road was even done. And to get to the store, they had a walkway over a ditch from the Highway 25 over to get to the store. There's probably a lot of people still remember old Elvis. Elvis was the bear. That bear was there for years in that cage out front. Whenever they had to get rid of him, age, none of the zoo in St. Louis didn't want it. And they had bought 2 of them, but one of them died. Her name was Susie. So they decided, we got to get rid of him. We're tired of fooling with him. So Wilma got out the 25-20, and she's the one that shot him, and they skinned him out and butchered it, and they had a big shooting match down at the Valley View Tavern. And there was lots and lots of people there. And the little ice house to the left, that's where they drug. There's a concrete porch on it that you don't see. But that's where they drug them 300-pound blocks of ice in there. And there was no refrigeration in it. It had walls about 3 foot thick, and they were full of sawdust and anything to try to keep it cool in there and keep a tarp over if you needed a block of ice. they'd go out there with the ice pick, and they were pre-cut, but you had to take them apart. That's the way it looks right now. It's getting pretty dilapidated. That's the back of it, and those steps going upstairs, they never had a handrail on them. I have no idea why, but they never. I guess if you was been out for a while, you might as well just crawl up, and you're gonna fall off anyway. I'm sure it's all building codes. This is their granary, and they sold all kinds of sacks feed, chicken feed, rabbit feed, horse feed. And on Tuesday, he'd back his big truck up there, and usually one person had to unload maybe 2 tons of feed, and that was every week. But that was all sacks, that wasn't loosed. And it was, the whole store building was kind of a gathering place in the evenings, because people didn't sit around and look at their phone or the TV. They would go to the Beacon, which is just, you can see the place from it. Or they'd go up here and then play pinochle. And it had a bar in it too. Dad didn't play pinochle very much, he was at the bar. There was a motel, and even as a kid, I went down. It was full every night. You'd have to go down and clean. They call it cleaning the cabins, but there was just 4 of them. The center piece there was just their storage room and the furnace room and so forth. Something happened one time in that furnace room, the whole place burnt down. It was made out of concrete blocks, so it just got dozed down. Now, across the road from there, 61 and 00DD. Oh, that's in the barn lot. It's owned by Paul Swint now, and he don't know what he's ever going to do with that. As you can see, it's in disrepair, but he don't want to fool with it. Yeah, he's sitting back here. Maybe you got a suggestion for him. And Uncle Lights used to make his wine down in that cellar, and that was a daily thing. If you got to go feed with him, he stopped there every time he got done. He stopped there and he had him a little glass of wine, and even if you were just a kid, you got some too. So it was worth the trip. All right, within that barn lot, there was a little bridge across a branch there. And I don't know if you can read it, but it says to St. Louis, 50 miles. And the bridge is no longer usable, but the side rails are still there. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the Alician, I don't have any pictures of the Alician, but across the street from the 61, Alician had a tavern, a dance hall. They worked on automobiles in a garage. And that was the Highway 25 was to the west side of it. But when they built 61, it left Alician in between them. And the house, it wasn't the house, it was the dance hall. It was turned into a home, and Charlie over here he was living there as a kid with the rest of his family, and it burnt to the ground. That Charlie Pinkley here, and I think
Here. Over here.
how many of you lived in there?
Pardon me?
How many of you were living there at the time?
5 kids, mom and dad.
So they had a bad situation there. And then it was built originally by Land Lewis. And some of you may remember Carrie Lewis. She was from here in St. John. They originally built it. Then it went to, oh, take that back, William Lewis. Then it went to Lamb Lewis. Then it went to Roman Holst, Charlie and Leona Grunmeyer again, Fred Riddle, and the last owners of the Riddle Dance Hall. Oh, they were the last owners, and then it was destroyed by fire, which was in the 50s. Then Charlie Grunmeyer's daughter Eunice bought the property, tore down the old tavern, and built a new tavern and dance hall together with a restaurant in it. And after that, it was run by a Mel Vineyard, and then he closed it. Now we're going to Bricky's. All right, the John Compton Bricky, he came from Potosi, age 21, and it was 1837. And he wanted to, he worked in a store in Potosi, and he wanted to come over by the river and have a store. So he found 83 acres. He bought it from some guy by the last name of Lakier and Henry Beckett. Then 3 weeks later, he bought 40 more acres from the U.S. government, and then it was Bricky's Landing. Riverboats could come there. He built a store. It was a busy place. People from all over would drive their livestock from Bloomsdale to Bricky's. They might come through the woods, and some say they drove as far from French Village, which is a pretty good hike without trying to keep some hogs in line. Getting lost here in my book. Well, he finally sold his place. Bricky did. He finally sold it. And to Rumbar. That was the Rumbar house that was up on top of the hill. If you got down to Bricky's and looked to the left, way up on the top of the hill, that's where that house was. And he didn't stay there very much, but he had 3 daughters, and 2 of them stayed there all their life. Their names aren't that important, but I knew one of them from a little kid. All right, that was a house. That was a house, and the reason that it has so many windows upstairs, that's how many kids he had. He had a bunch of them. You might recognize the 2 people walking in the front yard. Well, about this time, they decided they needed to make a flour mill. So that was the flour mill. And the river is right there on the left. And it was powered with a steam engine. From the mill building, you can see a little tin roof near the ground on this side. That's where the steam engine would have been. It was just a neat old building to look at all my life. Those 2 Rumbar girls, Sophia and Bertha, they stayed there until they died, but the one died before I was around. And then Sophie died in 65, but there was another woman lived there with her, but I never did know who she was. Now they had a post office and a rock quarry, the boarding house, the store, and a lot of people were there lived there for 25 years. That was a booming little place. And then now you can see it. That was a rail station. When Judge Rumbar bought that place from Bricky, that's whenever the railroad came through. So then they put a post office there. The post office was in the store for a while, and over in we called it the boarding house, and then over at the mill, there was a little office, and it had a slot and door with a brass plate on it that said U.S. Mail. So you could come in there, you could just drop your mail into a little basket there, or you could catch the train. And then they decided to expand a little bit more. So Theodore Caird was running the rock quarry. Oh, the post office opened about 1905. There was a school. Okay, this is Stringtown. All the people that worked at Bricky's, they built houses for them. And I think they took this picture, maybe the river might have been up a little bit. But at any rate, those were company-owned homes, and people lived in them that worked there. And I don't have a picture of it, but there was a school, and the school was had a variety of teachers, and one of the, a lot of you in here may know, was Miss Armella Peterson. Miss Pete hopped the train every morning and came to Bricky's so she could teach school, and hopped another train to come back to St. Jan. And there was a ditch, a Lewis Drury, Elmer Holst, Pershing Bayer, Rosetta Ritter, which was Mr. Drury's daughter. She taught there a while. And it stayed open until like 1951, whenever the school districts was reorganized. Then whenever they built the lime kiln, and I remember the kiln still standing there, but I could not find a picture of them. Charlie Buzzard ran the quarry for a while, and you know where he ended up, down here. Weiler from over in Gazelle area, he had the marble quarry. That was the blocks that he was cutting out of that quarry. And you see the hook standing down there, that was on a stiff leg crane. There it is, that's where they loaded the blocks on the rail cars. At that time, they said you could always tell how good the government was doing by how much marble they sold, because all the federal buildings had marble window sills in them, and that's where a lot of that marble went to. Now, back on that flour mill, it went downhill, but it reopened in the early 1900s. It was operated by Mr. George from St. Genevieve, and they had St. Genevieve brand white flour. Back in the Depression time, that Theodore Caird, he ran the quarry down at Bricky's for a while, and then just north of Bricky's, he started mining underground for just limestone, and they sold that on loaded on barges and sold it for the WPA, or the WPA, at any rate, it was government-sponsored work to put rock along the edge of the river. And that's the lime kiln that was at Brookies, and the kiln set just right out in front of that. And so Bean Arthurster worked down there, and he said they had scaffolding built. I don't know how they kept it contained in there, but they wheelbarrowed it and loaded it into the top of the kilns, and they were vertical kilns. And they sold lime and flour. Sounds like a good mixture. With the Kenyon Fire Department, we got called down there. We didn't know what it was. Some kids had got there and they burnt the store building and the mill building to the ground. Just, and the old boarding house, it just stayed there and nothing done to it until it was basically falling down. Where? Yeah, I have to mention, I don't have any pictures, but I gotta mention the Valley View Tavern. They had double D, they call that South Adder Road, that was Valley View Road. And that was pretty much a meeting place too, and they did have some problems there. One fella, he'd always drink too much, and he decided he needed to shoot up the place. So the one fella, he got hit, and then he shot himself. So after that, it was called the Bloody Bucket. So as a kid, I was in there a lot. Slim Coleman ran it, and you could pick up soda bottles along the road, and once you got 5 of them, you could trade them in and get you a soda. They were a dime. As you go out double D, there was police store, and there was it was just a country store. I think they had some gas pumps, but right next to it was Police Tavern. And I always thought the place was always dirty looking. And one day I went in there with Dad because I was just a kid, and I thought, well, there used to be a barber shop over there. Well, they tore it down, and I did not know that the barber shop had a tile floor in it. The whole building did, but when they tore the barber shop down, then you could see the tile. That's how grubby the place was. Then there was a music store. To me, there was a fella coming there, and this while I was in high school, and his son got drafted, and he was on leave from Fort Leonard Wood. And his dad was in the tavern, and he would drink some, and he'd get completely obnoxious, and he mouthed off to a couple of the wrong ones, and he got thumped about quite a bit, and then Norman, he had to join in to protect his dad. Well, he got whipped up on too, and I saw him a couple of days later. I was at Speed Station, and he came in, and one of them says, well, Norman, you got to go back to Fort Leonard Wood. What are you going to tell him happened to you? He said, well, tell him the truth. He says, I ran into a couple of ditches. Bill, could you find a barn? Oh, we'll go down to Kansas. Oh, there it is. This was Hooper's barn. Still there, still looks just like that. And Henry Hooper Sr. had that barn built, and they advertised for, or bought plans to build it, the trussing and everything. Then they hired some stone masons from Czechoslovakia. That's where they had immigrated from, and they stayed there, and they built every nail in that thing, laid all the stone, and upstairs was just one giant room. and they used to have dances up there. And then after the dances, Henry Jr. Hoover told me that they always had beer there, cake beer. Well, overnight it would just go flat. So the one time they more than they wanted to, but they dumped it out into the hog troughs, and it wasn't long. He said them hogs was running around out there, some of them falling down, laying down, squealing. There's people like that. Now we need to go down to Kinseyville. All right. Thanks. This Smith McClanahan, this was his store. It was right across, basically across the road from the old grist mill. And they called that the Michelle Creek, which meant small stream. And it was named for William Kinsey, and he was an early congressman from 1889 to 1891. The old grist mill, I don't know how there would have been enough water in it to ever run a grist mill, but that's what it says here. Whatever they quit, okay, this is one of the bridges, old bridges there that says by, I think, A.P. Caron, October 17, 1960. And it says it took 40 sacks of cement. Within the, okay, this is the, I forget the name of it. But as long as I knew it, Beelers lived in there, and it's, even today, I don't know how old that place is, but it's still a beautiful house. And all that rock coming out of that little creek. Actually, it looks like the same type of rock that was in Mr. Harmon's house that showed you a long time ago. And there was 2 stores. Well, that was the barn. That sits right by the house. That was a little spring house along the road there. What did I tell you again? I'm not done here, Bill. I have a problem finding the name here I wanted to bring up. So at any rate, there was 2 stores in Kinsey. One of them was from McClanahan, and the other one was a Labriere. Now, if anybody remembers Chick Labriere that ran the post office in Bloomsdale, that's where he was born and raised, down in Kinsey. And the McClanahan, we have some of the relatives sitting right over here of the McClanahan. And McClanahan had 3 children, Dorothy, Victor, and Virginia. Dorothy, 1935, married Leo Buett, and they had 7 children. Virginia married Millard Fowlett from Bloomsdale, and they had 13 children. Smith McClanahan that ran the one store, he was a livestock dealer. So he ran the store in Kinsey, and he butchered, and he hauled this to Festus, Crystal City, the boarding house at Bricky's, and one year he butchered 200 head. That's a lot of hogs. And the Labriere, he just had the one son, but he had the post office. Somewhere there's a picture of the post office. I don't know where it went. There it is. That was the Kinsey post office and the store. And that's where Colin Labriere was reared right there in that store. Now we're going to move out to Lawrenceville. Now, Lawrenceville did not start out as Lawrenceville. There was a trail that went from Bloomsdale, from the Kings Highway, out to the lead mines. And there was people traveling, looking for work. And somebody decided that right there where Lawrenceville is, they need to have a place for them to stop, get supplies, so they built a store. And this store they built, to me, was a terrible looking thing, but they called the whole area there, instead of Lawrenceville, was Punjab. It's an Indian name from India, and when they built the first store, it looks like a place that was from India. Got a cupola on top of it. And this is the church, but this is not the first church.
You have a picture of the food shop?
I don't know if he's got one, but if you want to see it, you can come over and look at it. Did we have one, Bill? No, that's a church.
Go back and look. Yeah.
That's it. That's the store. And I think it went my way of the weather. In 1917, the tornado hit the church and demolished all but the entrance, blowing some of this stuff all the way over the Mississippi. That must have been a pretty good storm. They built another church, and then in 42, they put a new entrance on it, and it's still there. Then there was they put up a gas station and another store over toward the creek, and that's where Lisa was raised. And Leroy and Pauline had a store and a gas station, and they ran them until 50. There's no other store, there's no businesses, nothing there anymore. Except the church. Schoolhouse is there, cemetery's still there too, by the way. 59 Pinkston built a dam, sold lots around it. In 68, the dam gave way. So if you had a lot out there, well, you can see where the lake was. Because it all come down toward Bloomsdale, and I can remember going to school and looking down like where the roadside park is at north end of Bloomsdale and seeing all that red water coming down and wondering what in the world happened upstream. That was when the dam broke. And the main thing they had there was the church and the picnic, and now all they got is the church. And the old schoolhouse, yes. Now we're going to skip all the way out to French Village. French Village was called Little Canada because it was all French Canadians that came down the river. Somehow they was on their way out to the lead area, the lead mining area, and they needed a place to stop, so they started trading posts there. They call it Camp on the Trail. And in that area, there's a lot of lead that's up near the surface. So they was digging it up. And by 1827, there were 20 French furnaces operating around Little Canada, smelting lead. And the church records show that first permanent settlers, names of Aubuchon, Papin, Leahy, Boyer, Lavert, Pratt, Rousand, Shoemakes, Hall, those are the ones that decided that's where they would stay in. And then after all of the French were in there, the Germans kept moving in, and the Germans were stonemasons. And even back into the 1800s, they were erecting houses, chimneys, and better furnaces to smelt the lead. 1857, there was a post office in French Village, and it's still there. There it is, there's the old post office. It says they plowed up old slave quarters and so forth around there, but after the Civil War, things mostly went downhill. Oh, they had a man by the name of Aubuchon had a general store and a two-story house. Upstairs in that home was a room called George's Room, which was reserved for George Washington Brooks. He'd been given to, way back whenever I started this, Luella Brooks. That was her wedding present, was George. And he stayed there until he died. And he was around 5 generations of the Brooks family. Whenever he did die, a granddaughter or niece of the Luella took care of him until he died. Then they hauled him to the Lebanon church. So he wanted to be buried with his white family. So he went back to Lebanon. And the post office that was up there was built as a coffin house. where they was the blacksmith shop across the road would go over and build coffins. Well, they sold feed there, but oh, the Church of St. Anne. There it is. That is the main building there now. Now most of the area around it, that's what church that's right next toward Y Highway from it. That's the store building. Gas pumps in front. All right, one thing I failed to mention. On the Bricky Road, about halfway between 61 and the river, there's a place called Needmore. And Dorothy Reed, which she was a Pinkley, that's where she lived. There was about 7 houses there and nothing else. Just 7 houses along the road. I guess they didn't feel like driving the other mile and a half down to the river, so they just stayed up on top of the ridge. But why it's called Needmore, I don't know, but it's still there.
Well, if I remember correctly, the miners downhill at Bricky's, some of them didn't like the union housing, so they decided to move up the hill. Well, when they came back down the hill, they got made fun of. They called their town Needmore because they needed more of everything.
Everything. So another thing that most people don't know is where French Village is now in St. Francis County. But at that time, there was no St. Francis County. You had St. Genevieve, Jefferson, and Washington County, and somebody decided there was too much area, too many people, so they made another county and they called it St. Francis County. That house was in Bloomsdale. And it was a little more tore down when we started, but me and my son is running the pictures up there. We moved that log house piece by piece. And the more you moved, the heavier they got. Well, does anyone have anything you need to say? Questions? Oh yeah, this was just to show you that that was my grandmother. She didn't throw any mail away. They're still everywhere. That address is Kinsey. Same person, named Danby. But look at the cancellation. It was canceled at Britain's.
And the postage was 1 cent.
Oh yeah, that's a 1.5 cent stamp, by the way. All right, this is Mom and Patsy. All right, girls, there she is.
These are Patsy's granddaughters.
Just wanted to say,
She wrote the book with
thank
me.
you for this great presentation, keeping this history alive, and I'm sure Grandma Margaret, Mary Elizabeth, Patsy Holst, and Juanita are dancing around Kevin. This is my copy of this history from my grandma to Laura from Grandma. I don't know how many copies is still around, but it's really they put their heart in providing this.
What I have given out of this book is a small portion of what's in this book.
Yeah, this is, it's a lot, but in here, it's just, it's like these talks, it's like you really get a kick out of it, and it's just it's very educational about the history of everything there's. So,
There's even another book that has a whole story of different families, and one of them is the Hoffmans. And May Hoffman lived on 61, just south of Chisholm Store, down at the bottom of the hill in a big curve. It was always called Hoffman's Curve.
yeah, there were a lot of wrecks on it.
A lot of wrecks. That was 70-mile-an-hour speed limit on that old highway. And she was Aunt May Hoffman to everybody. You didn't call her May or anything. Everybody called her Aunt May. That was her name. Well, I'm going to turn this back over to Mr. Wolk here. And I hope you enjoyed it. Has anybody got any more questions? I will say that I have not even got into Bloomsdale, so we're not going to stay all night. If there is another book by Lori Follard that has a lot of pictures of old Bloomsdale. And there is also another book, I don't know who made it, and you can look in the back of it, you want to see Holst? Well, there's some. You're going to read about them.